Well, good morning. How's everybody? Surviving the snowpocalypse, as we've heard. It's great to see you guys here today. I'm Brent. I'm the lead pastor here. And anybody been to an escape room before? Done that thing? Yes. How many of you have won the escape room? Yep. Are they still as popular as they were a year or two ago? I mean, are they still in business, or are these things starting to fade out now? You know, several years ago, my family and I decided to go do an escape room, which is terrifying to me because I wondered if we didn't get out in time, which of my children I would blame for causing us to lose. But fortunately for us, we did survive. We got out with like 1 minute and 42 seconds left, which was great. It was a fun room. It was game themed, and so all the clues were tied in with card games and board games. And as you put these clues together, sometimes you put a piece of the game on a board, and it was a magnetic lock, and a thing on the wall would pop open. It was really cool. And then at the end, you know, you get done, you put the pieces together, and then it goes off, you've won, and the door opens, and you win. And you're able to walk out of that door. And that's exciting, right? Because it's you won. Who doesn't want to win? You know, I thought about that, and I thought about how, number one, it's kind of strange that we would pay good money for somebody to lock us in a room. That's kind of interesting, right? Somebody's a genius to come up with that idea. But secondly, I thought, you know, we use doors a lot in our conversation and how we describe things in our life. I mean, maybe you've thought this before. You had an opportunity before you, and how would you describe that? If you decide to take up by the opportunity, what do? You say you have an open door, right? Or if you miss that opportunity, you say, oh, well, that door closed. And then we love to put things on pillows and on walls, and we say things like, well, when God closes a door, He opens a window, and all this, you know. And, even when somebody's dying and they're, close to death, we say they are at death's door, you know. And, of course, my favorite expression at my house is when I'm trying to watch television and my children are standing in front of me and I can't see the screen. I say, you make a better door than a window. Get out of the way, kid, because I can't watch. So we use these doors a lot when we talk about, just life in general. Well, we're in the middle of this series where we're talking about how Jesus describes Himself to us in His own words. And we've seen some interesting things, and I hope that you are bringing some of these ties together. It's like when we talked about bread, we even were able to look back at the Old Testament and talk about the Exodus and manna, because there's an amazing Old Testament tie-in to these metaphors. And even last week, as Ryan talked about light, there was a tie-in with some of the Old Testament scripture there. So there's a lot of Middle Eastern Jewish historical significance to the things we're talking about, and today is no different, because today Jesus uses a metaphor that in the Bible is translated as a door or a gate to describe Himself. And what I want us to understand is this is an interesting thing, because I want you to just stop for a moment, think about it. If you were to just hear that statement straight out and it says Jesus is a door, what comes to your mind? What do you think about? You see, I wonder sometimes if when we hear this expression, if we hear that Jesus is a door or a gate, as we'll read in the NIV, if we don't bring to this kind of a mental picture that may not be complete and accurate. Because a lot of times we think about using doors to lock people out, to keep people from getting in. And so when Jesus makes the statement that I am the gate, I am the door, I think many times we think about the exclusivity of Jesus, that Jesus is making a statement about Him being the only way of salvation. And to be honest, that's exactly what He's saying. But I think sometimes we hone in so much on that we forget that when Jesus says, I am the gate to the sheep, which we'll read in just a moment, He says, I am the gate, it's not only a statement of exclusivity, He's actually making a statement of possibility. That He's making a statement that says, you know what? Before, this was not possible. There was a wall, it was completely walled up, and now, because of me, I am the gate, I am the door, I am the entrance way that allows you to come in. And so today I want us to look both at the exclusivity, but not only at that, but to look at the possibility. Because I wonder sometimes if we put this analogy, put this metaphor in place as we build walls to say, some are in and some are out, and we see that maybe we're missing what Jesus is saying, and that he's saying, I'm opening it up for everyone to come. So we're going to look today at John chapter 10. If you have your Bibles turned there, it'll be on the screens as well. So in John chapter 10, we have this interesting scenario. I'm going to set it up a little bit before we get there. So here's what's taking place. John chapter 9, we have Jesus performing a miracle. It's an amazing miracle. There's a guy that's blind. He's been blind his whole life since birth. And it's on the Sabbath day, and Jesus heals the man, which healing someone on a Sabbath is a huge no-no. And you've got this incredible exchange that takes place. The religious leaders hate that Jesus did this. They're wanting to take him out. They're wanting to get rid of him. And so they begin to, say, oh, you worked on the Sabbath. We're going to take you down. So they begin to investigate the miracle. They try to figure out why did this happen and determine if whether or not Jesus is God. And how could he be God if he's doing such horrible things like working on the Sabbath? Interesting story. They call this man's parents in. This man is grown, and they call his parents in, and they question them, and the parents are afraid. They're afraid they're going to get kicked out of the temple, out of the synagogue, and they don't want that. And so when they're getting questioned, they're like, is this your son? Was he blind? And they're like, hold on, you got to talk to him, because they're afraid. They don't want the repercussions. They don't want the religious people kicking them out and separating them from their faith. And so they actually go to this man and they start questioning him and they start insulting him. And the religious leaders, they are irate. And this man finally looks at him and he says, you know what? If this was not from God, he could do nothing. And we said this, it was over. The religious leaders couldn't deal with anything else he had to say. And so they say to this man, they say, you were steeped in sin from birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. They threw him out of the temple. They threw him out of the religious circle. They threw him out. They rejected him and kept him out. Now keep that in the back of your mind as we read the passage today, because there is an idea as we read this that Jesus is addressing the people that were throwing others out and keeping people from God, because that's a part of what he's saying when he says, I am the gate. He's addressing that directly. So Jesus hears all this going on, and then he begins to talk directly to the religious leaders and the Pharisees. Excuse me. And listen to what he says. John chapter 10, verse 1. Jesus says, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. When he calls his own sheep by name and leads them he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and his sheep follow because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. This is a very common thing that we see over and over again. They do not understand what he's saying to them. So what is he saying right here? How do we understand what he's talking about? Well, as I said, we need to go back a couple thousand years and we need to put ourselves in a Middle Eastern context to understand what Jesus is talking about. What is he saying when he talks about a gatekeeper and a shepherd and sheep and all this? Well, here's what he's talking about. Jesus actually in this passage uses two different analogies. And the first one is this. He's picturing a communal sheep pen that would have been common in a town. Let's say you owned some sheep and you take them out to pasture and you get them food and you get them water, but you're going to bring them home at night because you want to sleep in your bed. But your house, you don't have a place to store 20 sheep. And so in the town somewhere, there would be a communal pen. And everybody that had sheep in that town could take their sheep to that pen and they would be corralled right there. And it's interesting because we would think, well, that's weird. How do you make sure you get your sheep back? I mean, I know that's what I would be concerned about. I mean, I don't want Ben's runty sheep over there. I don't want his diseased sheep. I want to get my good sheep back. And I know how he is. He's going to come in and try to pick the best ones for him. So what would they do? You have this communal pen. How would it be possible? Well, we would probably look at it and would say, as a non-shepherd person, I would probably say, well, don't all sheep look the same? And that's a pretty sheepish thing to say. I mean, no, not all sheep look the same. Did you catch that joke? Think about it for a second. Thank you, Megan. No, all sheep don't look the same. In fact, they're just like we are, unique and individual. All these sheep look different, and the shepherds knew them. They were so familiar with their sheep, they were able to pick them out of a crowd. And not only that, they were so familiar, they were so close with their sheep. They had such a relationship with their sheep that they could speak, or sometimes they would play like a flute or something, like a pan flute or something. And each shepherd had an individual tone or an individual sound that all that the shepherd would have to do would be to show up to the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper would go, "Oh, Brent, I recognize you. You're a shepherd in this town. Here, you may get your sheep." And he wouldn't have to go in and necessarily pick them out. All he would have to do is either speak or play that sound, and the sheep would follow. In fact, as I was studying this week, I read a story about in the 1980s, there was a Palestinian uprising, and the Israeli army punished an entire village in Bethlehem, near Bethlehem, because they didn't pay their taxes. So they took all the sheep in this village and they rounded them up. And they put them in this one pen. Well, there was a widow, and she relied on the sheep for her livelihood. They were everything to her. She couldn't live if she didn't have them. So she went to the guard, and she said, "Guard, can I get my sheep?" And the guard kind of laughs and says, "What are you talking about? There's no way for you to be able to pick your 20 sheep out of the hundreds of sheep we have." And she says, "Tell you what, if I can get my sheep out of here, will you let me have them?" And he says, "Yes." In that moment, her son takes out a pan flute, starts to play the tone that he had played around these sheep the whole time. And one by one, these sheep started coming out the gate. And they followed that son all the way home. Why were they able to do that? Because the sheep were so familiar with the shepherd. They were so acquainted with the sound of the shepherd's voice that they knew, this is our person. This is who we're going to follow. Same thing, the inverse is also true, that if a stranger came in and tried to swipe them or get them to follow, they wouldn't do it because they wouldn't follow that stranger. And that's what Jesus is referring to here in these first 6 verses when he talks about the gatekeeper and the opening the gate and the sheep listening to his voice. And we're going to come back to this in just a second as well. But let's keep reading starting in verse 7 because there's another analogy here that I love equally, if not more. It says, "Therefore Jesus said again, 'Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.'" Now here we have a little different scenario. No longer do we find a communal sheep pen in the middle of town. Now what we've done is the shepherd has taken his sheep out into the plain, out into the desert. Not a very arid area, not always very lush. Water and food is not easy to come by. And so the shepherds might be out for days or weeks, especially in the summer, trying to take care and feed their sheep. And so it wasn't always logical for them to come back to town every night and bring their sheep. So he would have to protect them while they were out there if they stayed overnight, because there were wild animals. There were coyotes and there were jackals and there were all these things that were there. And I meant to tell you that when Jesus first said that he was a gate, I don't know about you, but my first mental picture went to this, a gate. Anybody else think that? Barrier on hinges that swings open. Now let me jump back into the story here. When Jesus is talking about being a gate, he's picturing a shepherd being out in the plain, out in the fields with their sheep. How do I know this? Because if we keep reading in verse 11 that Pastor Ryan is going to deal with next week, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd." Now for me, when I started studying this, I wondered, I said, okay, is this 2 different ideas, a wooden barrier and a person? Or is this the same idea? Go back to the field, see the shepherd out there, night is coming, and he needs to protect his sheep. What is he going to do? If he's got 20, 50, 100 sheep, you've often heard sheep are not the smartest animals. They will nibble themselves to death. They will nibble themselves away from the shepherd. They will just wander and roam. What is a shepherd to do to keep his sheep safe? Well, what he would do is he would try to find an area that was enclosed, maybe on 3 sides. Or if he couldn't find that, what he would do is he would build with rocks a wall about waist high, and he'd build it big enough to house the sheep, and on top he would put thorns to keep things from crawling over. And then what he would do is at night, when it was time to protect the sheep, he would bring the sheep in. He would take them in through that gate. And then here's what he would do. He would sit down in between that opening. He'd keep his staff right there. Who's the gate? The shepherd. It's not a wooden structure on hinges. It's an individual who is sitting in between what is outside and what is in. So as the shepherd sits there in the gate, if a sheep tries to leave, they have to do what? They have to go through him to get out. He's going to wake up. He's going to stop it from happening. If a predator tries to come in and destroy and get the sheep, what would he do? They would have to go through him. And he has a staff, and he's ready to ward off any animals that he would need to in order to protect the sheep. So when Jesus describes himself as a gate, he's not talking about a gate on hinges that swings open and shut. He's actually describing one of the functions that a shepherd did to protect and care for his flock. And in doing so, what Jesus is doing for us is he's giving us this incredible and beautiful picture of his relationship to us, his relationship to his people. I love this picture right here. You see the shepherd sitting in the gate? That is exactly what we're talking about. And the sheep are safe inside. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I love that picture. What does this picture tell us? When Jesus says, I am the gate, what is he telling us? I think the first thing he's telling us is this, that the shepherd provides for his sheep. That's critical. He provides for his sheep because we know that all day he is leading them out into the pasture to find what they need to live. And in a climate where I said food and water are scarce, the shepherd had the responsibility to make sure that the sheep had everything that they needed. You guys, Jesus does the same for us. Jesus provides for us what we need. And when we need to go out into the field, when we need nourishment for life, he is the one who leads us. And it's this beautiful picture because when we think of like herding cattle and maybe herding sheep, often in today's Western civilization, we often think of driving them and pushing them. They have sheepdogs and things like that to push them and corral them. And that's not what Jesus said is taking place here. Did you see what he said is taking place? He said, I lead them. He doesn't have to drive them because he's standing before them. And as he walks and as he's talking to his sheep just follow right behind him. He's leading into the paths and the places that we need for nourishment and for life. That's what Jesus does. As I was reading that, I thought about Psalm 23. We're probably all very familiar with that. Psalm 23 says what? It says, the Lord is my shepherd and I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. That is what Jesus does in providing for the sheep. The problem for us is that sometimes we think we need more than we actually do. We see things around us and we get caught up in, oh, well, I want that. And we're not satisfied with what the shepherd provides us. And so what we do is we go outside his care. We go outside where he's leading, where he's providing for us. And we think, well, I've got this. And Jesus is saying, but you have to understand, when you do that, you don't find what you're looking for. You think it's going to bring life, and really what it brings is death. John 10:10 comes into play here over and over and over. The thieves and robbers come to steal and kill and destroy, and Jesus comes to give life. And we are left in a position where we have to determine, will we trust the shepherd? The shepherd says to us, I will give you everything you need. I will provide for you. but will we truly trust that he will do that? That's the first thing. I think the second thing we see here is not just the provision that he provides, he also gives us protection. He will protect us. I love the imagery of verse 9 where it says they will run, they will come out, and they will go in and find pasture. We go out and we find nourishment, and then we come in to find rest. Is there anything more satisfying than a night's sleep where you know you're safe and secure? Is there anything more troubling to be in a strange place, strange location, unknown surroundings, trying to rest? You're apprehensive, you're nervous. And Jesus is saying it's when we trust him for the protection and the provision that's where we truly find rest. When we come in, we don't have to worry about being eaten by a wolf or a coyote because the shepherd is at the door. And Jesus is providing the protection that we need. The wild animals that are out to destroy us, we don't have to worry about them because Jesus says, I'll give you rest, the shalom, the peace, contentment. And as I thought about this, I thought about Romans 8, where the Apostle Paul gives this incredible reminder for us, where he writes this. He says, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. You see, when Jesus says, I am the shepherd and I protect you, it doesn't necessarily mean that life is always rainbows and unicorns, but it always says that he is there with us. One commentary I read put it this way. It says, the picture of Jesus as the gate and the shepherd, we find an image of well-fed sheep whose shepherd knows how to lead them to pasture and water daily, and who at night gives them safe rest in the sturdy walls of the sheepfold. These are sheep that flourish and are content thanks to the skill of the shepherd. You see, when we begin to worry about provision and protection, the biggest question we have to ask ourselves, is it because we trust the shepherd? If we don't trust the shepherd, we don't believe he's giving us everything we need. But if we trust him, then we can rest in him and we can believe he will do what he says he will do. And how do I know this? Because I think it's the most important part of this passage. The provision and protection are important, but they pale in comparison to this. The shepherd knows his sheep. Think about that for the moment, how significant that is. What do you name? You name the things that you love, right? The things that you're going to keep around. You name your kids. You name your pets. You know, I was talking with a friend before Christmas, a friend of Luke McDonald's, and he was telling me how he grew up on a dairy farm in Illinois, and he had a cow growing up, and this cow's name was Raspberry. Isn't that cute? Why would you name your cow Raspberry? It's because he loved this cow. It was his friend. It was his pal. He cared about it. Over Christmas, I was talking with my sister-in-law, and she started dating a farmhand down in Arkansas. He's a farm manager, and she is turning into this farm girl, which is fun to see. And she was describing spending time with him on the farm, and she says, but there's this one cow, OS 11. That's actually OS 11. She sent me that picture. I said, what about this cow? And she said, oh, we don't like this cow. Ornery. Very ornery cow, just stubborn, mean to the other cows. And that's why we call it OS 11. I said, oh, really? She said, yeah, because in April, OS 11 will be a steak. You don't name things that you're not keeping, that you're getting rid of. Everybody seen Bird Box, Netflix? What'd she call the kids? Boy, girl, why? She didn't know if they were going to make it. She didn't know if she wanted to make the relational investment into them to give them names. So she called them boy and girl, all movie. Jesus says here, he says, I know you. I know your name. I know everything about you. And I love you anyway. You see, the fact that Jesus doesn't call you number 154 and he says, no, you're Amy and you're Matthew and you're Steve. I have an idea that he calls me Fluffy, but that's just a nickname. Just kidding. Just kidding. He knows me. He knows me. Fluffy would probably not be the name. He loves us. And when we understand how much he loves us and how much he knows us, it gives us an interesting and incredible picture. Do you know how much he knows you? Do you know how much he cares for you? Because in case you wonder how much he knows, just jump a little bit further in John 10 to verses 14 and 15, where Jesus again says, I am the good shepherd. And he says, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Get this, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. He says, that's how well I know you. Now, how well does Jesus know God? They're one. They exist together. And Jesus says, that's how well I know you. That incredible closeness that Jesus shares with the Father, he says, that's the closeness that I'm offering to you, that I know you if you will come into the sheepfold, if you will enter by the gate. Isn't that profound? That Jesus loves and cares for us that much, that he knows us that well. And because of that relationship with the shepherd, we can hear and know his voice. I love that picture. I'm not a shepherd. I had no clue about any of this until I studied this week. But man, the fact that a shepherd can speak and those sheep will just come following. Man, what an incredible picture there. They know it so well that when a counterfeit tries to woo them away, they run the other direction. But then as I thought about that, I thought this, and this is more of a self-indictment than anything else that I think about you, but I thought, you know what? I wonder, how well do I know the voice of Jesus? We live in an ocean of stimuli. 24/7 news cycles, unending information coming at us all the time. I don't know about you, but there are moments where I live in sensory overload. And with all this coming at me all the time, sometimes I find it challenging to just stop and sit and listen to the voice of the shepherd. But what I know is that we have a shepherd who loves us. We have a shepherd who cares for us so much that there's a shepherd that wants to speak to us. But do we care to listen to what he has to say? Do we care where he's leading us? Do we care how he's protecting us? Or are we so overwhelmed with everything else that's coming at us that we're just so unaware of what the shepherd is saying? I also wondered, what voices have we allowed in our lives that we've given so much attention to, that when it comes to listening, it's the voice of Jesus that is almost unfamiliar. Maybe we have trouble trusting Jesus. Life hasn't gone like we thought. And when you hear me say that he provides and protects, for you it seems like just the opposite. And it's easier to stay outside the sheepfold with what you know than to take that risk and to trust Jesus and see what could be on the other side. I think of it kind of like Let's Make a Deal. You watch that show? There's 3 doors. And why is it when it comes to Jesus, we think when we pick door number 3, we just assume there's a zonk behind there? No fun, no life. We never assume that if we walk through the door of Jesus, that we get exactly what Jesus is saying, that we get life to the full. What we have to understand is when Jesus says this, he's actually making a statement of life and death. And what I love about him saying he's the gate is he is making an analogy that is different from the last 2 weeks. We may think we have a relationship with food. We really don't. Food is something for us to use and say, Jesus says, I am the bread. He's saying, I can give you life. I can sustain you. I can fill you. When we don't really have a relationship with light. We like light. It provides life and it helps us to see the truth. But we don't have a relationship with light. We don't have a relationship with bread. But when it comes to Jesus, when he says, I am the gate, he's meaning I am the shepherd. And this is the metaphor that he gives us to say, I want to be and live in relationship with you, because what I'm talking about is the difference between life and death, going through the motions and versus really experiencing the life that Jesus came to bring. You see, Jesus is the gate, sitting in the opening, the entrance way for us. Not an entrance to dead religion, not an entrance to stuffy rules and do's and don'ts, but the entrance to life. And as he makes this statement by building this image, he does show us that there will be some on the inside that believe that and walk through the entrance, and there will be some that don't. You see, as I said earlier, many times, when I grew up, this verse had it translated instead of gate, it was door. And we see Jesus as a door, keeping people out, creating an exclusive club that's saying, nope, you don't get in, you're not good enough. When what in reality is happening is that Jesus is saying, I've created a way where there was no way. I've busted a hole through the gate, making salvation possible for all. And he wants you, he wants me, he wants everyone to come in. And he didn't make it more exclusive, he made it more possible. No, there are not multiple gates. Jesus is the only gate, and it is Jesus alone. And as we think about that, though, we think about, I want life, and how am I going to get life? We think, I'm going to find a shortcut to this. I'm going to find a way to sneak in, and Jesus says you can't do that. What about church attendance? Church attendance is a good thing. That'll help me get there. No, it won't. How about reading my Bible, going through the immersed reading plan? If I do that, will that get me there? No, it won't. The only thing that gets us there is going through Jesus. I love this analogy. I love this metaphor when Jesus says, I am the gate. Because as I read that, I understand it's Jesus offering to us an invitation to stop being spiritual, to get away from dead religion, and an invitation to find life in him. Now, there are those of us here today that we've already entered through that gate. And I wonder, as Jesus uses this metaphor, is the question for us, are we holding the gate open for others? Or are we circling the wagons to prevent others from experiencing what we have? Kind of creating our exclusive club. Looking at others and saying, you don't look like me. Your skin color is different. You vote different than me. You have an accent. You're poor. You don't drive a car like I do. Your job isn't up to what I think it should be. You live on that side of town. I wonder if when Jesus talks about those who are shutting the gate as the people who follow Jesus, are we the people opening wide the gate for those to come in? Or are we like the Pharisees, condemning people to hell because we refuse to get out of the way, and we refuse to see people how Jesus Christ created them in the image of God, rather than defining them by all that other stuff? We're supposed to be the ones that open the gate for others so they can know and follow the same shepherd, the same Jesus that we're talking about. Remember how I talked about chapter 9 in the beginning, the blind man? Here was a man who had been thrown out of his religion, thrown out, had nothing left there as far as the stability of his faith. And Jesus says, it's okay, because I'm the gate. This is really where you want to go. Are we opening that gate to others? See, Jesus is the entrance to a spiritual life we never thought possible, something we never could have achieved on our own. The question I have for you is, have you entered through that gate? Are you listening to the voice of the shepherd? And are you opening wide that gate for others around you?